And Angola, for example, is one of these very unique markets where there's an interesting development in terms of the availability of data center providers. But the type of data center providers we're talking about, neutral data center providers specialized in data center infrastructure. There's no such player in Angola, for example. These markets in Africa is one of the markets that continues to grow, as you mentioned, are critical for the many agendas that are on the continent, from financial inclusion to digital inclusion, digital literacy, and even the digitalization of many facets of society, from education to governance to healthcare. Data centers are at the core of all of these actions and projects. And so we understand that, making sure that there is a place where you can have your own infrastructure safely powered, secured, with limited access to foreign parties or people that are not authorized to have access to your infrastructure allows for these companies to develop, construct, operate, and even manage the data sovereignty recommendations by our agency.
Hi, all. Welcome to Africa Tech Talks 2025, the podcast where we explore the cutting edge of innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship shaping Africa's future. I'm Ivo Martins, your co host, joined by my other co host, André Cavaco. This season, we're diving deeper into the transformative power of technology across the continent, from groundbreaking startups to the infrastructure fueling Africa's digital economy. Today, we're kicking off with a truly exciting guest who embodies this spirit of transformation. So grab your coffee, plug your AirPods, and settle in, and let's get started. So today joins us Fábio José, the head of sales of Raxio Data Centers for Angola, a company at the forefront of Africa's digital infrastructure revolution with a mission to bridge the continent's data connectivity gap. Raxio is building world class data centers that empower businesses, governments, and communities to thrive in the digital age. Fabio brings over 2 decades of experience in telecommunications and IT infrastructure. He has participated in projects that have redefined how data is stored and managed across emerging markets. So, today, essentially, we'll be discussing the pivotal role data centers play in Africa's digital transformation journey, the challenges of scaling infrastructure sustainably, and what lies ahead for this rapidly growing sector. Fabio, welcome to Africa Tech Talks. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys, and thank you very much for having me. It's an honor, and I think this is the right time for us to kick off the year and talk about things that will definitely enable transformation across the continent. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fabio. And grabbing your words that we are working towards uh, the transformation of the continent, let's go and talk a little bit about Raxio, your company that is expanding its footprint across Africa, including its data center in Angola. And how do locally hosted data centers like Raxio's drive the continent's digital transformation and economic growth? And what unique advantages do they offer to the African businesses compared to offshore infrastructure, especially considering that Africa's data center market is projected to grow at 12% compounded annual growth rate?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, these projections in terms of the growth projections are constantly being updated, but it's believed that it's going to be slightly higher due to the number of investments across the continent. So, speaking about Raxio is a company that was founded in 2018. We're relatively new in the space. We've got, part of an investment group that backs Raxio, being Roha and Meridian Investment. But we have a very strategic and aggressive, expensive expansion plan, if we might call it. Okay. We currently are designed to operate in 7 locations across Africa. So that being Ivory Coast, Uganda, Ethiopia, Mozambique, DRC, Angola, and Tanzania. With Angola being the latest one, and hopefully Tanzania also coming online in the near future. But yeah, we operate in these 7 markets, 7 very distinct markets, and the unique thing about Raxio is that we don't treat the continent as a single entity. We understand that there's differences in terms of cultures and politics and even economic ecosystems, and thus differences in infrastructures. So what the group has decided to do is bring state-of-the-art quality build projects for infrastructure in terms of data centers across these locations. And that will bring a leveling ground in terms of the quality of services across these locations, across all of the locations that we chose to operate. And so the result is that what we bring to the market, besides the technological innovation, is the certainty and the surety that that there is a solid foundation for the digital growth and the solid foundation of expansion of telecommunications, the ICT ecosystems in these markets, in the locations that we operate, that will definitely have a sustainable, cost-effective, and state-of-the-art technology for them to pretty much take the next steps in developing and expanding even their own strategies and digitalization agendas. Okay, so that's essentially what we do. I'm relatively new to the company, but I play around with a couple of concepts, and we've if we were to say this, we can safely say that we came to rationalize the digital infrastructure landscape in order to absorb the brunt of the requirements for the ICT companies and even telecommunications company in order for them to have a platform to grow. That's essentially what we're doing. We're already operating in Ethiopia, in Uganda. Ivory Coast was launched recently, DRC as well. I think DRC was launched August last year. Mozambique, beginning of last year, 2024. And now Angola, we expect to be ready to operate around mid-June 2025. So it's really exciting times, and we are really anxious to contribute to the development of the telecommunications and ICT landscape of Angola and also of the continent.
Well, and first of all, I think, and I wish you guys the best of luck. But I also see this as being interesting because most of our questions, or not on most of our questions, but we have a footprint that wants to be African, and your approach is very locally based. So, although you want to be broadening your horizons in Africa, you also want to be based in some countries where you think that you can have an opportunity, and you want to put your feet on the door to provide the best services for them. And that's interesting because you probably consider that there's a difference in those markets, right?
There, yeah. So there are differences in these markets, and we've grown to understand. So one of the things that it's important for me to highlight is just how fortunate this opportunity is that there's a diverse group or mixed group of people or professionals that have worked across the continent. And that alone is a very specific asset to have, to have different perspectives, but also local perspectives and people that are experienced in the data center. I've operated in the data center space for, like Ivo said, well over a decade, many years. My colleague has been involved in the construction of the first neutral data center in the country. We've got experienced project managers across the group that operated in different regions. And so you may ask yourself, okay, but what's so special about that? Being able to tackle different challenges, from licensing, project management in different environments is an amazing asset. Okay. So yes, we've seen that there's differences in these markets, and we understand that there's a gap. There's an opportunity for us. Although in some of these markets, for example, there's an existence of other players, and we don't. And Angola, for example, is one of these very unique markets where there's an interesting development in terms of the availability of data center providers. But the type of data center providers we're talking about, neutral data center providers, specialize in data center infrastructure. Uh, there's no such play in Angola, for example, and it's a very repetitive case across many of the African countries. Reason being that telco operators require data center facilities to accommodate their infrastructure and gradually expand their footprints in their operations. So what we see across the continent is that usually in a lot of emerging markets, the telco operator has a data center and he will utilize this data center not just for his daily operation but for commercial objectives. Then there's the other challenge as well, whereby some of the major clients also create their own data centers, their own infrastructures, because of safety, security, or some perceived notion that their data or their infrastructures or their services will not be reliable if they don't own it or control that. Um, the result is that there is massive, um, I don't want to say waste, but there's massive commercial inefficiencies in the day-to-day operations of these companies because running a data center is completely different than running a bank and a data center, than running a telco and a data center. Right? You need different sets of skills, different types of equipment, different type of licensing. And it could go on and on and on and on. Different types of concerns. And so what happens is that these operators in these markets become stretched thin so much that they tend to understand there's a need for a specialized data center operation that is truly carrier neutral. And again, I emphasize this because neutrality is something that is key in this industry. Being able to feel secured, accommodated, treated impartially, without any sort of favoritism against you or towards others, means that you technically enter not just a technical space, but a market space where you are able to expand your ideas and your business ambitions. And so it's critical for Raxio to really develop this neutral ecosystem whereby there's the opportunity for everybody to reduce their extraneous operational costs. And we focus on making sure that your infrastructure, what your resources are needed in order for you to produce the services or the outputs that are required by these by our clients, and that's done in the most efficient way, in the most secured way, giving them peace of mind that they don't have to constantly invest in transformers, in cooling systems, in security and physical security in terms of access to facilities and so on and so on and so on. And that there's a team dedicated 24/7, 365 and sometimes 366 days of the year, um, in order to manage that infrastructure. So, yeah, these markets in Africa is one of the markets that continues to grow, as you mentioned, are critical for the many agendas that are on the continent, from financial inclusion to digital inclusion, digital literacy, and even the digitalization of many facets of society, from education to governance to healthcare. Data centers are at the core of all of these actions and projects. And so Raxio is a company that chose deliberately to be part of that ecosystem. And there exist other companies across the continent that do so as well. The continent is being become the focus of attention for data center expansion. And I think we'll see a lot more in the coming years.
And that's great, and that's great that finally the continent is being looked at as somewhere that can provide and can grow with this kind of investment. And I think that is one of the reasons why we're doing this. Ivo, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So that's so what got stuck in my on my mind, Fabio, is that Raxio is one of the key players on the data center. Solutions, bringing to the, especially here in the continent, you're, what do you say, a neutral operator, right? Because some entities might have data centers, they use the data centers for their own internal operations, then they, so what I understood is that they can share a little bit of their capacity to others, but they have
Mhm.
to divide, their team has to be divided into internal operations for their own businesses like banks or telcos, and then serve their third party customers, right? So you focus on being completely customer oriented, and so it's a neutral data center, so to speak. So customers have to
Correct.
entrust. Okay, so customers have to trust their systems and their data to you guys. So this brings me to our next question, which is data sovereignty. Uh, so we know that data protection laws have become, and data privacy and data protection has become a quite hot topic theme in the last years. Around 60% of African countries already have enacted data protection laws since 2010. I think in Angola, particularly, the law was enacted in 2011, but um, the National Agency for Data Protection only was, got put into force like in 2019, I believe, I think, something like that.
Hmm.
But the law exists for more time. Um, And my question is, so with all these countries, customers entrusting their data to operators like you, right? You guys typically operate tier three certified data centers, but there are concerns about data sovereignty, right? People using and putting their systems and their data on cloud or on this or that data center. How do you guys, and Raxio particularly, ensure the compliance, that organizations and governments and public institutions or private players know that they need? How do you address these
Hmm.
concerns?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and I think it's something that it's definitely going to be a recurrent subject. So number one, Raxi does not handle data, right? Um, and there's a lot of data center companies that do not handle data. But before I even said that, it's important to say that we understand that data is a critical part of the digital ecosystem. Sometimes data is the byproduct of an activity. Sometimes data is the product of a specific activity. Whether it be in Africa or in other locations, I must reiterate that data centers are not interested specifically in our customers' data. Now, I remember having this very specific conversation about 7 years ago when I worked for another data center company here in Angola. And the client said, "Oh, you're concerned, we're worried that you're going to touch our data or have access to our data." At the time, we only provided him with, I think it was something between 3 racks with 42 U space and about 3.5 kVAs of power per rack. And because he was a bank, my question to him was, look, I have money, my personal money, um, in your bank. Do you constantly gloss of what at the money that I have in my bank. I mean, should I be concerned that you're going to misuse my money in your bank account? He said, no, of course not. That's not what we do. And so that's the same question in terms of data centers. Data centers operate the infrastructure that runs services, right? Our primary job has to do with making sure that these infrastructures, these servers, routers, firewalls, everything that is associated with the IT ecosystems, routers, and even sometimes, we accommodate for DWM equipment, for SLTEs, for cable landing stations, and so on. We make sure these operation systems remain 100% online. That is the core business. 99.9% of data center operators do not care about data. Right? As a matter of fact, we care that there are concerns that our clients operate their data responsibly, but we don't manage data. We don't interact with clients' data. We only interact with equipment. So perhaps that is a typical conversation that is should be had with cloud providers. Okay. And yes, some data center operators also become cloud providers because they move up. A lot of them do not as well because they try to stick away from this conversation in terms of data sovereignty, data sovereignty, data sensitivity. Now, how do we how to answer the question of data sovereignty within the continent and even within Angola? Well, we create the conditions that cloud operators and other data operators, data creators have the infrastructure, or at least the supportive infrastructure for them to manage to make sure that that data remains in country. In our country, we all know, and we've lived in Angola time and time, enough time to know that many years ago, everything from a service perspective was understood that if it's outside of Angola, then it's better, right? Or if it's outside of the continent, it's better than it's safe. Right? I think the landscape has changed, and we see lots of events from data breaches to even the changing of political landscape in terms of relationships of different countries. And so we understand that, making sure that there is a place where you can have your own infrastructure safely powered, secured, with limited access to foreign parties or people that are not authorized to have access to your infrastructure allows for these companies to develop, construct, operate, and even manage the data sovereignty recommendations by our agency and for many other companies to create what we usually see as a data retention strategy, a data management strategy, a disaster recovery strategy to be operated. And that is the core focus, at least of Raxio and many other data centers operators that I know.
Okay, so customers shouldn't be worried with that
Oh, no,
part. At least if they are working with Raxio's data centers, you guys have all the necessary controls in place so that the customer's data is out of boundaries for you guys, so to speak. So you do not interfere with their data. You don't have any interest in in working with their data. But it's a common question. That's why I've
no.
put this question to you, because I imagine this comes out of the pocket every single time you have a meeting with a customer. They say, well, what about my data? How do you guys ensure that everything is okay? I must be compliant with this and that and blah blah blah, what's so not. So it's a common question, right?
Yeah, but I usually answer the same way that I've answered here. Now reminding them that we have number one, we have no physical interaction with your data. Number two, it's none of our business or it's not part of our interest to actually manage and operate your data. Some of our partners do that, and some of our partners are public cloud or private cloud providers or CRM providers or these entities are more interested in providing these services. But there's one thing that also we tend to highlight that is, I think it gets lost in the conversation. The cost of handling somebody else's data is tremendous, you know, and not just the cost, but also in terms of the financial, um, risks associated to it, and compliance risks associated to it. It's just not worth it for a business like Raxio, you know. And so what we tend to do is to partner up with local companies, and they handle their data, and we make sure that they have a safe environment for them to carry on their business. But we also have, tried to develop a relationship with all of the local regulators to make sure that they are satisfied with the way that we operate our infrastructure and that these norms are then passed on. There is something interesting that I've personally seen at Raxio is that we are not just focused on the operation per se, but we are focused on the process. And so adopting a process that allows us to mitigate access to sensitive data from our clients, and making sure that from a process point of view, there are even limits placed upon us to with regards to what we can access to our clients. That is something tremendous to see. And we use our processes as well to make sure that our clients and our partners feel at ease with their infrastructure, being handled or stored by us.
Yes, so due to the costs, but not only the costs, the risks, you're not
Correct.
interested even in managing data from other entities, and that's one of the reasons why, or two of the reasons why it's not interesting to be managing it. So you rather maintain your neutrality and be extremely compliant, creating the environment so that your clients can handle their data in the best way. You mentioned some kinds of CRMs and all processes like that and softwares like that. That takes me to the third question, um, which is 50% of the African SMEs are already adopting cloud solutions as of 2023. This came out as a study from PwC. And how does Raxio's Tier 3 certification infrastructure and potential partnership with Angolan institutions will offer cost-effective cloud colocation solutions for SMEs struggling with digital adaptation?
Yeah. So that is an interesting question, and it evolves. It takes us back to where we see ourselves in the ecosystem. Okay, and we see ourselves in the ecosystem as a foundation, a stepping stone, if we want to call that. A place where people can then jump onto the next stage and operate these types of solutions. So one of the major challenges that we have running in the continent per se is the ability to have major projects associated with major infrastructures that are able to accommodate multiple clients or needs at a scale. Okay. Once we see that often in our continent, that once we reach a certain amount of scale or usability or users into it, using a very specific service, right? Then there is a decline in terms of quality of service. There's a decline in the stability of that service. There's a decline in the way of which the service is provided effectively. So I can give these many examples, but for example, if we look at um, supermarkets, right? So we have supermarkets in many places, but the moment that specific supermarket or shopping mall, for example, um, starts to get a lot of people, a lot of traction towards it, it becomes sort of unmanageable, right? Well, you don't have enough truck, you don't have enough parking spaces. The trucking services that need to bring the goods become congested. Just the access, the roads towards that supermarket, for example, become difficult, right? So where do we come in, right? We provide the infrastructure that allows for scalability at the very removing the expense of investing heavily in the infrastructure that will support the CRMs, the cloud-based solutions, and everything else. That's where we come in. Again, we provide the infrastructure that allows for people or other customers and other service providers to operate on top of that infrastructure without having the major costs of building such infrastructure. And it sounds tricky to say this, but let's just think about what it really what does it take to build a data center, right? Or to operate the data center reliably, right? You need first of all you need power. And you need power all the time, and you need the power that is managed critically all the time, right? So that alone requires a major investment because in the African continent and even in our country, we have one utility provider, and with the expansion of the cities as they are in the urban centers, those services become saturated or faulty, say, and then that leads to unreliability. So then we switch back to operating. Okay, let's go back to a secondary power source, which is generators, right? Now, generators are an interesting solution for the continent, and they've been here for quite some time because typically in a continent, in a country that produces oil, such as Angola, having fuel or oil or petrol services being subsidized, the cost of access to run these generators from a fueling perspective, again, just a fueling perspective, is relatively marginal. Maybe, right? Because you have other nuances, the cost of importing such machinery, the cost of operating such machinery, the cost of even training and having the adequate personnel to operate such machinery. So that's one thing that you have to take into consideration. But again, you need something else before the power. I missed that. You need space, land in the right conditions, in the right places with a certain amount of variables that allow you to construct your data center. And so that is also very expensive, especially in the growing urban areas of the continent, right? Not just Angola, but in other places. Land is always something that, although we have plenty, it can have its limiting factors, such as what are the legal requirements for an entity to own land? Is it easy to own land? Is it easy to negotiate such land? Then you have to secure the land and everything else, make sure that it's accessible. All right. There is also elements of regulatory requirements, licensing, and every other types of compliance. So that alone brings the cost of running your own data center quite high. And we remove all of these aspects, all of these major concerns from not just hyperscalers, not just telecommunications providers, not just from the government that has its own agenda of either digital inclusion or financial inclusion or even e-governance, but we remove all of that from all of those that require these services and make it accessible, right? We make a dream of a expansive and growing African landscape full of the potential in terms of digital innovation and connectivity. We make it attainable because we invest first in order for others to reap benefit.
So you basically, by creating the infrastructure and making it accessible and democratized, you can have companies building on top of your infrastructure and scaling up pretty much as fast as they want, with the security of energy, land, and all kinds of also probably regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're going to talk about another aspect that is very important. Ivo, I think that you have another
Yeah.
question. Up
I
your sleeve.
really, yeah, I really enjoy talking about this particular topic, which is cybersecurity, right? So, Fabio, um, according to the Interpol's 2024 Africa Cyber Threat Assessment Report, there was a 23% year-on-year increase in the average number of weekly cyber attacks per organization in Africa. So this is
Mhm.
the highest average increase, not the total number of attacks, okay, not the highest in the world, but the increase over year, according
Yeah.
to data
Increase.
from Checkpoint, right? And this, in conjugation with the fact that 35% of small organizations, they believe, there's also a study, we'll share the data on the screen in a second. They believe their cyber resilience is inadequate. So this comes out on a global cybersecurity outlook 2025 report. So it's quite fresh report. So how does Raxio, and specifically Raxio in Angola, will safeguard clients against escalating threats like ransomware, DDoS, in these emerging markets? How can customers feel safer in having their systems on an infrastructure like yours, instead of having the systems on in house, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. And again, I think it's an understatement to say that cybersecurity is critical and ultimately fundamental in terms of any operator strategies. Right. So back to Raxio. Raxio, we don't provide cybersecurity services. What we have is a cybersecurity division or unit that operates all of our systems and make sure that our systems and everything else associated with our operations is safeguarded, right? In terms of what we understand in terms of these types of attack, DDoS, well, DDoS attacks are more connected towards connectivity providers, right? IP transit providers or internet transit providers, or even carriers. And then if we look at what we see in terms of ransomware, well, that's a different type of cybersecurity attack, not really connected to ISPs per se from a connectivity point of view, but in terms of service providers for all any digital related service. Um, so our data center makes sure has all of the facilities in all of the processes and stages. That is an interesting facility for your cybersecurity strategy. Okay. So it is important that lots of these companies or all of these companies have a well-developed cybersecurity strategy that accommodates for whether you're developing this is utilizing Raxio as your data recovery location, as your data restoration point or location, for example, right? Or or Raxio as a secondary or third location for you to recover or continue your operations. Okay? So we are able to pretty much accommodate whatever design and structural plan or strategy that you have from a cybersecurity point of view. And usually that involves duplicating or duplicating or multiplying or having replicas of your infrastructure, your primary infrastructure into a safer location, right? Raxio is that safer location, right? Now, we also have a few partners across the operations that we currently have that are specified in cybersecurity. And so we do engage in these ecosystems to make sure that the right service providers from a cybersecurity people are speaking with the right clients, and they have at least a space or a location where they're able to provide these services protecting. So that is our role. We are essentially a haven for your cybersecurity strategy, whereby you can definitely count on our infrastructure to continue to make sure that in case something happens, in your primary infrastructure, you have a secondary location that allows you to do that. And a secondary location that is not going to cost you an arm and a leg or anything else that these ransom guys are going to ask for you or something like that, you know. Again, but it's imperative that operators have they define a cybersecurity strategy, a plan, a contingency plan, plan A, plan B, plan C, because that is what data centers do. So data centers are built or operate under contingency power source A, power source B, power source C. In case this system fails, there's this backup. In case this backup fails, there's this contingency plan. That is exactly the philosophy of data centers in order for us to maintain us 100% operational. And that's the goal of every data center. Now it's critical. And we've seen this. Um, so you look at, for example, a cyber of ransom attacks, right? But ransomware is interesting because it's assumed that you will get your data if you comply with the demands. That is one part of the landscape in terms of attacks. There are some attacks that are not meant for ransomware. It's just you know uh, it's just the idea of making sure that those systems are no longer available in order for a certain party to gain some sort of competitive advantage. Now, it's important to be resilient. Right? And so Raxio provides you the infrastructure for you to be resilient at a very low investment cost.
Got it. So customers can count on you guys, especially when they're drafting their disaster recovery plans, their business continuity plans. You got their backs on that end, and that's very good to know. Andre, back to you.
Thank you, Ivo. Thank you. And so we were discussing the processes, but also the energy sources and necessity of this kind of infrastructure having all kinds of backing up systems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the main topic being backing up energy. Um, this is also a big topic, and lately I've been delving into the energy landscape for the world and especially for Africa. And one of the things that is really interesting is the consumption of energy. This is a major challenge for data centers. So cloud computing and now generative AI will drive energy consumption even higher, and it's estimated that a single ChatGPT 4 query consumed 10 times more energy than a regular Google query. And
Mm-hmm.
so generative AI systems might already use around 33 times more energy to complete a task than task-specific software would. How is Raxio planning to balance an operational efficiency with sustainability goals in Angola?
Yeah, so there you go. I'll come back. So the question of being muted is one of those things that we learned once we were in the pandemic. Right, it happened all the time. Again, so energy and sustainability um, are foundational cores of our operations. Okay, we know that we are dependent on energy, and energy is a critical part of our business. That's why we are, heavily invested in managing energy efficiently. So that's a core value of data centers, right? So if you want to see how efficient, how important energy is to a data center, yeah, you can visit. I've been fortunate enough to visit a couple of data centers, not just across the world, but in the African continent itself. And it's a place where ideally there's meant to be no waste in terms of energy. So you'll see on a lot of data center facilities the lights are not permanently on. They're only motion activated, for example. You have sensors making sure that you're not wasting or generating way too much energy that is not required. You try to achieve the optimum PUE, which is around 1.3 or 1.4, depending on the, the capacity of power that you have generating versus the capacity of power that you are consuming. So even within our understanding in terms of running an efficient data center, and that is the reason why data centers are scalable from a power perspective. We don't start with 6 megawatts of power day one. We gradually grow as capacity becomes occupied. But there's also different steps in terms of managing power. So you have anything from the power from the main grid, which we always try to use. And in Angola, fortunately, a big part of the energy generated in Angola comes from green energies, the hydropower generators, like you know, and so Angola is in a quite fortunate location, right? Sure, there's other sources of energy here, diesel, and even now there's major projects in Namibia and other places in Luanda, whereby solar farms are being invested. Interestingly enough, by the major consumers or major oil and gas companies, right? But in a data center environment, we try to use as little power as possible to achieve as much as possible. So there's very limited waste. I don't want to say there's no waste, but there's limited waste. And so the certifications, the LEED certifications, the ISO certifications, and even the design in by the Uptime Institute already guide you for you to have an efficient operation from a data center power consumption. Okay, and that
And
is critical.
that is
Yeah.
critical, but allow me. That's not only critical for me, who has not been connected with that, to see how much um, ability to um, directionate and give a direction to the energy is in a data center is really incredible. But also it's important to say sometimes that, and people may not understand this, but the country here has a lot of opportunities in terms of energy, not only being cheap but also being widely available to be used. So it's really impactful. I don't know.
It's
Yeah.
cheap, Andre, because it's heavily subsidized, right?
Yes, but it's cheap to
And
produce also, Ivo. It's cheap to produce.
yeah, but Andre, there's also something that is critical, right? um, we produce a lot of energy in Angola, and we are just now ramping up our industrialization efforts. So we are not in the same place where a country like South Africa was a couple years back, whereby they had to limit the amount of energy associated by the consumption for household consumption and the industrial aspect of powering industries because they have a massive industrial park. We don't have such things yet. And then even with the industrial parks that we currently have, I believe it's able to sustain the consumption. As a matter of fact, um, we need additional industrial parks in order to stabilize the consumption of energy. What does that mean? That means that you know all of this energy that is being generated just from the hydropower stations alone needs to be properly managed, but also properly distributed, as well as properly applied and utilized. And so data centers tend to do that and try to do that efficiently, right? We always try to build the systems with redundancy, typically from a powering perspective, at least, at the data center perspective. But in Africa, it's difficult because you don't have many utility providers, independent utility providers. You have a single utility provider. But you can, have different power lines coming from different grids powering your data center and making sure that your data center is powered on most of the time by the utility provider and not by generators, for example. I remember in my previous life, we operated the data center on generators for about a year and a half, right? And by my previous life, I mean in the other company that I used to work for. By the time the power from the grid came online, the savings were astronomical. So it began a rapid decrease in terms of utilizing generators, that we've utilized generators for 90% of the time. And in less than a year, it was the opposite. So we utilized the generators 10% of the time when there was any maintenance to be done on one of the powering critical services. And the reductions in terms of cost, maintenance, and even making sure that you have the ample time to make sure that your backup system are functioning operational. So the gains are massive, right? So being power responsible is a core foundation of Raxio in terms of data center, in terms of the way we manage power, in terms of the way we acquire power, in terms of the sources of energy that we try to use in our data center. Okay. And the way that we manage that from a very efficient point of view, from a design perspective, from an operation perspective, and we'll always try to to take advantage of the latest technologies that are obviously more power efficient. Now, you mentioned something about the AI, moment that we currently live. Yes, they currently consume a lot of power, but they will get better. All right, we will see a moment whereby the power consumption for a ChatGPT query is going to drastically reduce. All right, and that can be aided by again data centers, because once you distribute the computing power across many locations, then these systems can start to operate more efficiently. So that is happening between the data center, right? Data centers are actually currently an interesting safeguard or gatekeeping institutions that allow for power to be managed accordingly, paid for it accordingly by these institutions, and not be tapped on from the grid. All right, so you won't see an instance whereby just because of this power is this data center over here, we're going to take power from this community and we're going to use it to power up the AI nodes that we currently. No, data centers will never do that. They'll find interesting in engineering ways in order for them to make sure that we can accommodate the growing demand.
Uh,
And
so
I know a lot of
you're
my
always
yeah.
you're
Go ahead.
always trying to, sorry, you're always trying to optimize, constantly finding solutions to optimize, not only the grid but also other sources that can you can come across. In this case, you've mentioned the generators, but also you believe that throughout time, and and we are already seeing this a little bit with the DeepSeek queries and the energy spent to create a query on artificial intelligence engines will decrease rapidly. So it's not a worry anymore for you. Well, it's a moment that you believe that is going to be overcome, and not to be the same in the future, although we will have probably another issue due to the usage of that same AI, but that's always going to be a challenge for the engineering teams.
Yeah, and then you have things like going happening currently in data centers like liquid cooling, and the immersion of IT equipment into liquid foundations in order to maintain those equipment. Cool. You have different things going on. You've had the project from Microsoft whereby they submerged a data center for some time and operated the data center underwater. You know, just as there are places in Europe that operate data centers in specifically cold locations. Um, but again, I believe that there's going to be a combination of developments. across multiple systems, from powering to our powering optimization, power generation, power distribution, cooling, the ability to extract heat efficiently from components, because that is required in order for these components to last longer. And that is something that is not mentioned nearly enough in terms of sustainability and green innovation. Data centers aid that process by making sure that the equipment, the IT equipment, last longer because they operate in a optimum environment. That means that you don't have to replace your data center, your equipment, um, in a short amount of time. From a costing, from a funding perspective, it is what it is. From an environmental perspective, it reduces the time to waste of certain equipment. And so there is also that benefit in terms of the green and sustainability aspect of the data centers, that we make sure that a lot of equipment have a longer lifetime in terms of utilization before they become obsolete and then move on to waste and become part of the waste management. Management in
Yeah,
the data centers is a
yeah.
critical function.
So a lot of things are happening. A lot of things are currently evolving. Fabio, where do you see Angola's data center market in the next 5 years? What do you think will happen in the next 5 years? I'm not even asking you in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years, but in this time frame of 5 years, what do you think will happen in the market as a whole?
Yeah, I think we will reach a certain peak in terms of the number of data centers projects across Angola, right? I think we'll also see a redistribution of the footprint of data centers across Angola. By this, I mean that the major data centers, the real data center projects, and especially those that have the ability to provide quality of service, are primarily focused in one. I think there will be a distribution across of these systems in other places in Angola. Um, and then we may even see the optimization of these systems. The good thing about Angola is that there's a lot of room for growth, right? We're not like other markets where there's a risk of saturation, immediate saturation in terms of the data center providers, right? We are, from a country perspective, growing relatively in a conservative manner, but we're growing in terms of the number of accesses that we have from a submarine perspective, number of projects that we're getting from a satellite perspective. So from a connectivity perspective, there's some growth there as well. Then there's multiple investments by multiple companies, all right, across Angola, that are quietly investing in connecting the urban centers to the rural areas, right? The urban centers to the mining exploration locations, or to the farming, or to the farming and other areas. And so once the capillarity of the network across Angola happens, and that leads to a democratized access, that means um, having access to reliable services at a more affordable price point, for example, then we'll see an expansion again of requirements for data centers, because that will enable the ICT landscape and all of the other service providers and other stakeholders to really take a foot and say, okay, now it's time for us to revamp certain projects in education, financial literacy, healthcare, and everything else that is associated with that requires now the IT or ICT element in order for it to be properly managed, monitored, scalable, and so on. So what I see for Angola is a, a an ecosystem that will, in at least 5 years, have at least one or more two players coming into the market, or at least one or two of the existing players will continuously expand the infrastructure, so they'll have more capacity available into the market. We also see a government taking a very deep interest into data centers because of data sovereignty requirements, and the continuous expansion of the oil and gas sector in Angola. I believe that um, there will be additional requirements for data centers in locations that traditionally there have not been a data center. So we're talking about data sovereignty, but we also need to have a decentralization of the concentration of data centers across the globe. I think that's where the next 5 years will lead the conversation.
Very interesting insights, Fabio. It's been wonderful this last hour. We're talking. I feel we could have so many. I have so many questions after you answering this. I get more questions popping in my head. I want to thank you once again for sharing your expertise, your passion for innovation, and also your vision on the matter. Right? It's people like you that will inspire us to think bigger and push boundaries in this ever evolving tech scene. Um, to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this conversation with your friends and network. Let's keep amplifying the voices driving Africa's tech transformation. Join us next week as we continue exploring the stories shaping Africa's future, same time, same place. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep building the future of Africa. Fábio José, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Right.
Thank you,
And
Fabio.
I appreciate, and I think you guys have a wonderful project. It's inspiring and it's a necessity as well. I think these voices and these stories need to be told. And I'm just honored to be part of your wonderful guest list. I've seen some very very interesting guests coming. I think I'm the least interesting, but it's not a competition. I'm okay with that. But congratulations.
Welcome to
It
the
is what it
family. Welcome to the family, Fabio.
Thank you. Congratulations once again. And anything that we can do to support and to make sure that more voices are present in these spaces will definitely do.
Thank you.
Best wishes for you and for Raxio and for everyone that support that project. Thank you, Fabio, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.